This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Love this podcast? Support this show through the Acast supporter feature. It's up to you how much you give, and there's no regular commitment. Just hit the link in the show description to support now.
Explaining football to the friend who's just there for the nachos? Hard. Tailgating from home like a pro with snacks and drinks everyone will love? An easy win. And with Instacart helping deliver the snack time MVPs to your door, you're ready for the game in as fast as 30 minutes. So you never miss a play or lose your seat on the couch or have to go head-to-head for the last chicken wing. Shop game day faves on Instacart and enjoy $0 delivery fees on your first 3 grocery orders. Offer valid for a limited time. Other fees and terms apply.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
It took a lifetime to find the person you want to marry. Finding the perfect engagement ring is a lot easier. At BlueNile.com, you can find or design the ring you've always dreamed of with help from Blue Nile's jewelry experts who are on hand 24/7 to answer questions, and the ease and convenience of shopping online. For a limited time, get $50 off your purchase of $500 or more with code LISTEN at BlueNile.com. That's $50 off with code LISTEN at BlueNile.com.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hello everybody and welcome to Writers on Film. My name's John Bleasdale, I'm a writer and film critic, and today I'm going to be talking to Hannah Strong, who's just written an amazing book about Sofia Coppola and her films. It's an in-depth look, probably one of the first real studies of Coppola, and it's just a really candid, interesting and vibrant and a beautiful, it's an Abrams book, so it's a beautiful looking book as well. So it comes highly recommended, but you'll understand all that once you hear me and Hannah talking about it. Remember, if you enjoyed the episode, please like, subscribe, leave reviews if you can. That helps spread the word. Our numbers are great at the moment, but they can always be better. There's an audience out there which is much bigger, and all they need to do is tune in and find out about it, and they'll be happy as Larry, and they'll thank you if you put them in that direction. So before you do any of that though, please enjoy the conversation.
I find my brain just kind of turns off about 5:30. So yeah. It's like if I'm having to do anything where I need to be like eloquent, it's best to do it before that point. I did a record once at 9 p.m. and I was just like, guys, this is going to be like unintelligible.
Oh, the bar has been raised. Now we're going to have to be eloquent.
Yeah, now I've said it. I'm setting you up for like some great conversation. And I'm like, oh shit, I don't know. Long time since I wrote this book.
When did you start it, actually?
I think it was May 2020.
Right. God, yeah. So almost 3 years ago. Yeah. Almost
3 years. Yeah. It feels like a really long time ago because of the pandemic. You know, it's like I was doing it all throughout all the lockdowns, and then I think I finished it October 2021. So it was quite a long process.
Right. And you sort of I was trying to think of some clever sort of Sofia Coppola way of visualizing that. Did you drift through the writing of it in a gauzy haze?
I did it actually kind of, it was mostly chronological,
right?
And not in terms of her work, but in terms of how the book is structured. So I started with the Virgin Suicides, and then I did The Beguiled, and it was, yeah, I had an order, but it wasn't the order that the films were made in, because we decided that would be too simple, that would be too boring to do it that way. So we decided to go thematically instead.
Yeah, I think that was a good decision, because it also, I mean, again, I'm not hopefully not being too idiotic, but that idiosyncratic sort of personal approach isn't that far away. I don't think it's too much of a reach to say that that's similar to how Sofia herself sort of addresses her films.
I don't think so. I especially feel that each of her films has a kind of personal slant. I mean, obviously, like Lost in Translation, she said it was kind of based on her experience growing up and moving away from home for the first time and living in Japan. And then On the Rocks, she said, is kind of inspired by her relationship with her dad, but not really inspired by that. And Somewhere, she said, was drawing a lot from experiences she had on holiday and on work trips with her dad. So I felt that there was a kind of call and response element to her work, where she was drawing on her personal experience and I was drawing on my personal experience, and kind of how her films informed my life and my like interest in cinema without being too self-indulgent. But then, because she hasn't made that many films, it felt like it just made more sense to try and kind of group them by these recurring themes. And I think all of her work does have a lot of overlap in terms of the theme she's dissecting. And the only hard part of like pairing them up, or I mean, there's technically 3 in the Celebrity and Excess chapter, but Murray Christmas is kind of an outlier anyway. But the only difficulty was kind of deciding which would go where, because there is, kind of, you could put the virgin suicides in the fathers and daughters category if you wanted to. Like there's just kind of different places things could go. But in the end, this was kind of the order that made the most sense to me, to kind of approach it from a different creative perspective than just going straight down the line. And because Abrams, who published the book, had just done the Paul Thomas Anderson book with Adam Naiman, and he did it chronologically by when the films were set, which I thought was a really cool way of looking at it. So we were just kind of keen to do something maybe a little bit different that would be fun for the reader, hopefully, to kind of like navigate the films in maybe a different way than they had come to them as a viewer.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting, that's a good point as well, because otherwise the expectations, I mean, I've already watched them in order, so the expectations are might not necessarily, it might be more creative to do it the way you did, I think. Could I ask as well that so because you start this book in a really candid and open way, and you draw parallels with your own lived experience in a way that I found very courageous and sort of fascinating into the process. What's your sort of story in terms of how you ended up writing about film? What was your entry into the world?
Well, I mean, to start at the very beginning, the first film I ever remember seeing at the cinema was Chicken Run, and I thought it was the greatest film ever made until I, watched another film and was like, oh no, this is now the greatest film made. But that's the first very clear memory I have of being in a cinema and thinking, oh my God, this is incredible. This is where I want to be all the time. And I didn't get to go very much because it has always been quite expensive, and we were not a very well-off family, and the cinema was quite far away as well. So it was a real effort to go. And then it was like, my mum hates the cinema. She's not at all a fan. So it would be, who's going to take her, that kind of thing. So I ended up getting a lot of VHS tapes out of the library. And that was kind of where I really became obsessed with cinema and became obsessed with movies. And then as I was growing up, and I mentioned this in the book a little bit, but I was ill quite a lot of my teens, and films were really the thing that I had, that I retreated into and put all my energy into. And at the same time as this, I was reading a lot of film magazines. I had an Empire subscription, I had an NME subscription, which is different. But so I was kind of immersing myself in journalism, and particularly print journalism was something that I really loved. I loved the kind of the tangible nature of it. I love being able to hold something in my hand, and it was always just a very glamorous thing to me, this idea of writing about movies. It seemed so far away from anything that was going on where I lived in my kind of small town. So it was always like, that was the big dream, was like, oh yeah, maybe one day I could do this. And then I kind of knew it was a very unlikely thing to happen. I think I knew I had a very early perception that this was like not a job for like everyone. It was only the kind of very lucky people got to do it. So I was very, very pragmatic in a way, and had it in the back of my head. But my mum was very much kind of, she was supportive, but she was like, you can't just say you're going to be a film writer, you're going to write about movies, you need to do something else. So she told me to go and do a degree, do an English degree, and then you can decide what you want to do with that. So that was what I did. But always, like, I was writing film reviews in my journals when I was a kid. I was always just like obsessed with this idea of not only watching films but talking about films and analyzing films. I was always the one who wanted to go and like have a coffee after the movie with my friends and like talk about what we just seen. I was really like, I liked watching them, but I couldn't ever kind of leave it at the cinema. It needed to be like more for me. So I think I drove everyone a little bit insane with like the fact that I could never just like watch a movie and just enjoy the movie. I had to kind of like pick it apart. But Sofia Coppola definitely was one. I think I was about 15, 16 when I first saw The Virgin Suicides, and that is like, I think for a young woman, it's like the kind of perfect age, because you do see that film and think, oh my god, this is my life. Like, regardless if you've had that experience that the film is depicting or not, you just think, oh, she understands me, she understands being a teenage girl. And that was definitely like, I was one of those teenagers that was just instantly kind of smitten and instantly felt like I'd met my soulmate.
Well, obviously, Doctor, you've never been a 13-year-old girl.
Exactly. This is what I would say to my therapist at the time. Like, I was like, you have no idea how bad it gets, but yeah, it was kind of like, I say it in the book a little bit, but she really gave me this language to express myself, which I don't think I necessarily had. And I think seeing her films, seeing probably David Fincher's films at the same time, seeing Martin Scorsese films for the first time, were these kind of like, I mean, it's such a cliche, but like a lightning rod moment where it's like, oh, these things that I'm watching on screen are this kind of visual representation of, kind of how I feel in my head, and all these kind of like difficult, big, scary emotions. And more than that, they were an escape. I think like they were so beautiful, these films, especially Sofia Coppola's films, and that I think instantly kind of appealed to me, this idea of getting so far away from the setting that I was in.
Well, what is your small town?
So I'm from a small town outside of Sheffield, called Stocksbridge, which I think has about like 5,000 residents or something. It's very small, and at the time it was even smaller. We've had kind of some development since then, but it was like an hour to get into Sheffield, and all my friends lived in Sheffield, so I was very kind of isolated. And I had a brother and sister, but they're not, they like films, but just very, very different sorts of films from me. So there was never a kind of, we didn't really have that in common or anything. And I think I was just like a really lonely kid who felt like an outsider, which is like the perfect kind of target audience for I think a lot of Sofia Coppola's films.
Absolutely. I mean, it sounds very similar. I mean, we lived in a tiny village outside of Barrow-in-Furness, and I used to always joke to people, I don't live in the middle of nowhere. We have to get a bus to get to the middle of nowhere. It's not that.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the set. Yeah, we used to regularly have, there was a road to kind of get to Tesco, and like my mum and I would get in the car and drive, and we'd have to like stop on the road because there would be a farmer with cows, and we would have to like wait 10 minutes for the farmer and his cows to pass. And living in London now for as long as I have, I'm like, wow, that was kind of crazy. That was such a part of my childhood, like queuing behind farmyard animals. But it's I think it builds character in film critics, having to really like fight to be part of that world.
Well, so how did you get lucky then? How did you become one of the lucky ones?
I think I probably had an easier time of it than a lot of people, just in that I knew straight away this is what I wanted to do from kind of the age of about 15, and then I was very dogged about getting where I wanted to go. So the first thing I did that was kind of along the lines of film criticism was I was on the youth jury at Sheffield Doc Fest when I was 17, and
oh wow,
that was the first time that I'd kind of been in a, so it was the first time I'd ever gone to a film festival, and I just thought it was the most incredible experience of my life. And I'd written an essay about Werner Herzog's Grizzly Man, like that was the thing that they read and were like, yeah, this kid this kid knows what she's talking about. So that was like the gateway drug, and after that I was just kind of like, yeah, this is it, this is what I'm going to do now. So I went off to university in Leeds, and Leeds has an amazing yearly film festival just called Leeds International Film Festival, and it's so great. And I did volunteering with them, and through that I was able to watch loads of films, and then I would review the films for the school paper, for the university paper. And that was like another kind of massive moment for me, just realizing that like it wasn't even that I had to necessarily go to London, although I think that was always the goal in my head. But just knowing that there was kind of a world of like cinema around me was very kind of inspiring, and meeting all these people and meeting these filmmakers through doing Leeds International Film Festival, and just really feeling that there was a way to get to where I wanted to go to be a film critic. And we had speakers who would come in, journalists who would talk to us about, working in the arts, and that I found very kind of bolstering. I think actually having kind of lived experience, and my family are not like, I come from a family of like science people. They like science and kind of hard evidence. So me wanting to kind of be an artist and be a writer was very they're absolutely lovely people, but they just had no kind of like frame of reference. So it was really good that I was able to kind of meet these people who are very like open about their experience and open about how I might get there. And then I went away for a year and did a year abroad in Berlin, and that was very like a lot of self-led learning. So it was great for me because I could just direct everything towards film, which is something I was interested in doing. Even though it was an English and history degree I was doing, I was just like, I'm going to try and sneak in as much film as possible, which is what I did. And I did an internship whilst I was in Berlin with a film journal out there. It was only a sort of 3-month internship, but again, that was like, I mean, Berlin generally is just like such an amazing city for cinema, and obviously it has the festival. That was my first international film festival, and it was, again, kind of extremely overwhelming. And I feel like all these tiny experiences really like just kept that little like flame alive until I was able to graduate and move to London and take a job that had nothing to do with film, but it was a copywriting job. So I felt like it was kind of a step in the right direction. And then eventually I did some freelance bylines whilst I was working at the website that I had this copywriting job for, and then wrote something for Little White Lies, which was kind of always my big dream as a teenager. It's like, oh, one day I'd like to write for Empire and Little White Lies, and haven't got Empire yet, but have got Little White Lies. And after that first byline, it just so happened a job came up about 6 months later, and I applied. And I remember sending my mum a Facebook message saying, I've applied for this job with Little White Lies. I don't think I'm going to get it, but it's really good to just do an application and like get yourself into the group. And then I got the job. So that was gosh, 6 years ago now, 5.5 years ago. So it's I think a lot straighter forward a route than a lot of people end up taking. A lot of my friends, a lot of my peers kind of didn't get that experience of just going from one job to another job and then being there. But I'm very aware of kind of how fortunate that was, and how lucky I was that Little White Lies kind of took a chance on someone coming just kind of straight out of a kind of very corporate copyrighty job with only a few kind of film bylines. But I think they really had a sense that this was something that I was my whole life, and was something that I 24 hours a day lived. And I think that's definitely kind of like shown over the past 5.5 years. And then the book came, about 2.5 years after that. So I'd been with Little White Lies 2.5 years before we started talking about doing the Sofia Coppola book.
Wow. I do think there's my experience of talking to so many people from festivals and from journalist backgrounds, and obviously due to this podcast largely, people who've written books, it just seems like there are so many ways to get there. There are so many roads, and they all involve luck to some extent, and they all involve enthusiasm. But other than those two things, everything else could be. It feels like there's an absolute spectrum.
Oh yeah, I always say when I get asked about this, but a lot of the time it's college students, university students, or just young people who are really interested in getting into film writing, and they'll ask, kind of how would you recommend I go about getting into film writing? And it's such a hard question to answer, because I think now more than ever, there's kind of no real way you have to do it. And like you say, it's that enthusiasm and that kind of luck that are going to be the biggest factors, but and hard work as well. But I'm always surprised at like kind of hearing how people end up doing film journalism. And there's people that come from completely different backgrounds, and then people that come from other parts of film, whether that's programming or whether that's working in marketing or something. They just kind of discover a real interest in film journalism. But yeah, I think it is like, it's easier in some ways and harder in others. Obviously constantly kind of scrambling to get work, I think, a lot of the time, and budgets are constantly being cut and places are shuttering, and it does feel like cultural journalism generally is such a precarious place to work. But I do feel that in a lot of ways it has become easier if you have that kind of tenacity, which I definitely did, and just kind of always kept at it, and always thought like eventually, kind of even in the depths of it being like such a slog to get these pitch emails sent out and to deal with kind of the constant rejection, I was like, no, got to keep at it, and then eventually it will pay off, and it has done. But I think burnout is so easy, and if you get burnt out before you start doing it, then you're kind of you're never gonna get there. But I always am very like honest about it as well. I'm always a kind of like, I don't think there's any point in trying to disguise how difficult it is as an industry. I think like you've got to go in just with no expectations and hope eventually to find some way there.
But it doesn't surprise me actually that you said you came from this copywriting background, because I was having a conversation actually last week. I was talking to Wendy Mitchell about this, and she was mirroring something that Wendy Ide told me. The two Wendys of film criticism had told me right at the very beginning when I started writing. And I remember Wendy Ide saying, respect the deadline and respect the word count. And you'd be surprised that puts you in like the top 3% of everybody writing if you do those two things. And then if you're good at writing as well, then that. But her point was kind of like, to get to this stage, everybody's kind of good at writing, but not everybody respects the deadlines.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, as someone who sees it from both sides, as an editor and a writer, it is just kind of amazing to me how many writers I'll work with who don't respect the deadline and will send me a draft that is vastly over. Obviously with word counts, sometimes you can kind of eke out if your editor is going to be okay with you sending something a little bit over or not. I have a 10% rule, so you can do 10% over or 10% under, but if you're doing it anything under or anything over that, I'm going to ask you to cut it down, because I just don't have time. I don't have time in my day. But yeah, no, I mean, that's the most useful advice I was ever given, because that's what people remember as well. Like, they remember if you are an easy person to work with, and if you're kind of reliable. Reliability is such a it's like hen's teeth in this industry, getting people that will file copy when they say they'll file it, and file it well, and it'll be clean, and I won't have to kind of do 6 rounds of editing on it. I can just do 1 round or 2 rounds. I mean, and I talk to other editors as well, and like, it's everyone, regardless of what area of journalism you're in, this is the same thing that comes up. It's just like making the person you're working with or working for's life easier is kind of the thing that will always be like remembered. It's a bit like school in that respect. You want to kind of like make sure you're making it as easy as possible for the person who is trying to give you money, or in the case of school, a good grade. So it's very basic things.
Absolutely. But I think it's worth sort of reiterating. And plus, I'll take the opportunity on this podcast to say I'm always on time, always. I'm sure Hannah is as well. Yeah. Now you're on the other side of the fence, you'll be able to, you'll have learned that lesson, 1,000,000 times over. So let's get back to Sofia Coppola and how. Your relationship to her, you've already sort of given us an inkling, an idea of how she spoke to you as a teenager and as a girl, specifically that teenage girl experience. And what I was really interested in with reading this book is my own reaction to, obviously I'm coming at it from a different lived experience. And I have definitely been guilty in the past of dismissing some of her work. I loved Virgin Suicides, and I loved Lost in Translation, and there are other ones like The Beguiled and Bling Ring, and somewhere that Marie Antoinette I really liked as well, but that I feel I ought to revisit, because I feel that I've definitely glided over those in a way which is too casual and too incurious, if that makes any sense. And it was interesting that you mentioned that Adam Nyman's book about Paul Thomas Anderson, because in a way they're really exact contemporaries, and they've made more or less the same number of films, I think, just a rough thing. Did you feel when you were writing the book that you were sort of addressing an audience like me to some degree, that there was an element that you had to, I mean, I know she's got a lot of fans and admirers out there. I don't mean to undervalue that at all, but a critical consensus that was perhaps not as in her favor as would be for, say, a Fincher or a Paul Thomas Anderson.
Yeah, oh God, yeah, I think definitely she is considered more of a mixed bag as a filmmaker than the other directors in the series, because by this point we had the Coen brothers, Paul Thomas Anderson and David Fincher, which is an incredibly strong roster, but they are all pretty much considered to have maybe made, some people would say no bad films, but others would say maybe only one bad film, whereas I think Sofia Coppola, people are much more kind of critical, and some of that comes from the fact that she is a nepo baby, as the kids say now, but I think a lot of that is also it's because she's a woman, and because the things she deals with are very, very traditionally feminine and women's themes, and she does have a very kind of ornate and a very girly kind of aesthetic a lot of the time. So I did go into it kind of aware that I had to write for the people that would be buying this book primarily, which is people that love her and want to kind of read about her films. But then, I did feel there was this kind of big chance to like set the record straight about these films that I felt were maybe a bit unfairly maligned. And it is interesting because I wasn't coming from a position of I absolutely love everything she's ever made and I won't hear a word against it. I was when the Bling Ring came out, I didn't like it. When Marie Antoinette came out, I was teenager, and I didn't like it because I didn't think it was serious enough. I was very into my history, and I didn't like the idea of this, kind of poppy, like slightly anachronistic take on Marie Antoinette. So I took that very seriously and didn't like it. But
were you quite sniffy about it?
Yeah, I think I was. Yeah, I think I just had this idea in my head of period pieces needing to be kind of dour and serious. And obviously, like, that changed massively. Like, the older I got and the more I was exposed to, I think, seeing Amadeus for the first time, it was kind of like, unlocked a lot of what Sofia Coppola is doing in Marie Antoinette. So it was kind of this like process of not only trying to address previous criticisms of her by the tastemakers, but also look at my own kind of biases and how those had formed, and why my opinions on things might have changed throughout the years, why I suddenly thought that The Bling Ring is actually a really good film, and why I thought that The Beguiled is maybe not quite as good as I thought it was when I saw it for the first time. So I think the thing I wanted to capture was not only how much her films mean to me personally, but I feel like how much they maybe have been kind of shortchanged or just not given enough kind of like critical context, or just kind of getting a sort of like well-rounded image of like who she is as a filmmaker and who she makes films for and how they have been received. And I didn't want it to feel kind of like exclusionary. I didn't want it to feel that I was trying kind of saying, one way or the other, like, oh, she's not making films for you don't, I was just trying to kind of give the best possible insight and write in a way that would be entertaining and interesting for people, regardless of kind of how interested they are in her. And I mean, one of the things is when you're writing a book like this, you have to do so much with the text. It's not like writing a film review. It's part you're doing a history of the film, you're doing a history of Sofia Coppola, you're doing analysis of the film, analysis of the critical reception, evaluation, and it was such a kind of daunting task to try and get in all these different elements and do it in a way that would be engrossing for like 50,000 words. And that is something that I was very conscious of, was that it's quite a difficult needle to thread, especially when most of my life I am just writing like 500 word reviews.
I mean, it is funny as well, I think, that idea of reevaluating something when you have to properly invest time and attention in it. I found myself doing that in the past, where I watch something and my sort of Twitter reaction will be, yeah, rubbish, or 2 stars or whatever. And then I'll have to write a proper essay or feature on the piece. And I'm looking at it and I'm going, no, it's really interesting because I'm giving it much more time and I'm thinking about it much more, but I don't want to sound dishonest, like I'm only liking it because now I've got a job to write about it,
Yeah, I think it's one of the kind of pitfalls of social media now, is that we do that instant reaction is so rewarded, and not only rewarded by our kind of endorphin rush when people like it, but like that's what PRs and people are kind of looking for. They want your first reactions and things, and it just means, I think, that sometimes we're backed into a corner a little bit, and it does mean that people can't feel like they can't change their minds. And I especially notice it at film festivals, I think, which is obviously where a lot of Sofia's films have premiered, where people come out and the first thing they're doing is sending a tweet or sending their review off to their editor. And it's one of the reasons I really liked going to Venice for the first time, because you have that little kind of pocket of like 8 hours or something where it's still not a lot of time to think about it, but it's more time than you would ordinarily get. And it just feels like the process has been speeded up so much, even before I was doing this job, I'm sure, but everything just has such a short shelf life now. And I think that Sofia Coppola has really benefited from reevaluation and kind of reappreciation. And also I think I do talk a little bit about this in the book, but one of the things that came up when I was talking to her collaborators was that a lot of them were saying the people that were watching these films as teenagers are adults now, and they're the ones that are writing the reviews, they're the ones that are writing the criticism. So it's not that like the films might have ever been bad. It's that, you know, they just kind of, the people writing about them were not the kind of target audience. And that I found kind of, you know, maybe in 10 years time, there'll be people writing about films that I didn't like, that they'll be kind of reappraising them, and I'll feel really old and like out of touch with the youth. But it's definitely like, I think she's someone that has had a kind of reevaluation of some of her lesser films, but in a way, like stuff like The Virgin Suicide, stuff like My Antoinette, they were always very popular with a certain like subset of people. And certainly growing up as I did on the internet, like images from her films and kind of her as a filmmaker and her as a personality were always like so popular on Tumblr and kind of on LiveJournal and all these like kind of internet what's the word, like micro
blogging,
micro, no, what's the word, it's
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. At Mint Mobile, we like to do the opposite of what Big Wireless does. They charge you a lot, we charge you a little. So naturally, when they announced they'd be raising their prices due to inflation, we decided to deflate our prices due to not hating you. That's right. We're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today. Smart choice. Make another smart choice with Auto Quote Explorer to compare rates from multiple car insurance companies all at once. Try it at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
Subcultures, that's the word.
Right.
She was always very popular with kind of a specific type of internet subculture. So it was nice to kind of finally get a chance to give her the kind of reverential like auteur approach that I think, you know, we usually see reserved for like the Scorseses and the Francis Ford Coppolas of the world, for example. It felt like she's been, you know, doing this for almost 30 years now, so it was kind of a ripe time for it, especially because now we're seeing filmmakers who are inspired by Sofia Coppola. Like Charlotte Wells was saying how much Somewhere had inspired Aftersun, and I was just like, wow, it's, you know, the kids that made these films are going to be making movies of their own now. So
absolutely, yeah. I think that was one of the best things about the book, or about I think, you know, my own experience of approaching it is going to be different to a lot of people's, but it really made me think I've got to rewatch these films, because there are a bunch of them that I've seen only once, and there are a bunch, much more so than as we sort of have indicated previously, sort of like contemporary equivalent male, you know, let's underline, filmmakers. So, you know, I only saw Somewhere at Venice when it premiered, and I never saw it again. And I remember sort of being, yeah, it was okay, but being disappointed by it as compared to you know, her previous films. But maybe that I mean, when you're this is something you'll recognize, I'm sure, from like festivals, you know, being disappointed because a filmmaker has not made the film again that you liked is not necessarily the best way of approaching a piece of art. You know, you shouldn't, you know, you might need to go back and actually watch it just with a clearer head. So that's certainly a film, having read that chapter, I wanted to revisit.
Oh, I'm so glad, because Somewhere is definitely when I was younger, before I was kind of as immersed in film as I am now, I would have said The Virgin Suicides was my favorite, but definitely now Somewhere is the one that I think is my favorite of her films. But I think it was difficult for her coming off the back of making Lost in Translation, which is obviously like such a huge hit, and then making My Antoinette, which kind of bombed both critically and commercially. It wasn't quite a disaster, but I think it was certainly considered a disappointment by the studio and by Sophia, only in terms of how it was received. I think, you know, she was happy with what she did, as she should be. It's a great film. But yeah, I think Somewhere was kind of a difficult one. And even like, you know, it won the Golden Lion, but she not the Golden Lion. Is it? Yeah, it's the Golden Lion.
It's Golden Lion, yeah.
I was doubting myself. As all these animal awards.
The Golden Griffin.
Exactly. I was like, oh, silver bear, Golden Lion, yeah. So you know, it won the Golden Lion, but even then people were saying, oh, she only won because Quentin Tarantino was the head juror and they used to date. And it's like, she can't even have that without someone, you know, kind of sticking their oar in and saying that she's only got it because a man said she could have it. And I think like it's such a quiet film. It's like 70 pages on the script, which is kind of unheard of. And it's this film about filmmaking, film about Hollywood that is so unassuming and so melancholy and not dramatic at all. It's not, you know, there's no moments of kind of high drama in the film. Like the most dramatic thing that happens is he falls down the stairs and breaks his arm at the beginning. Like it's, you know, it's full of all these really quiet moments. I think not only is it this really like insider view of Hollywood, but it's this father-daughter relationship, which I think we've started seeing more of now in films like After Sun, where it's all kind of in the silences. It's all in the things they're not talking about. There's no big blowout confrontation, like thinking of The Wrestler, where there's the argument between Randy and Stephanie, like towards the end. You know, this is all very kind of like introspective and
it's a bit Jim Jarmusch, isn't it, as well? That sort of like the scenes between the scenes, if you like.
Yeah, there's a lot of details for you to fill in, and I mean, I believe that she's very good friends with Jim Jarmusch. So it doesn't surprise me that he would be a kind of like huge influence. In fact, there's a lovely there's an episode of the TV show What We Do in the Shadows, the vampire mockumentary, in which Sophia and Jim have a cameo. They're like having drinks together at this vampire bar, and I just thought that was just such a wonderful little moment, and also shows that they clearly have just got such great senses of humor. Like that.
That's my favorite TV show. That is my this year I've just discovered that, and we've just binged it, me and my daughter, and we're just like, wow, this is the best.
It's so good, and that's what I love about
that fucking guy.
That's another thing I love about Sophia, is that I think she's very aware of pop culture, and she's very kind of tuned in, and we see that in all her films, obviously, with the music and the costuming and her kind of music video background. But even like in On the Rocks, you know, she's got like this character who's carrying like a Shakespeare and Sons tote bag, a Shakespeare Company rather, and has a Bernie Sanders sticker on her door, and she's wearing a Paris with You t-shirt, and it's very trendy, but in a kind of if you know you know way, which I think again always appeals to me as like a pop culture lover, but also very much appeals to teenagers, because as a teenager all you want to do is be cool, really. And being into Sofia Coppola films, I think, is like you feel like you're part of a club, even though there's like millions and millions of people who love her movies. Being able to pick out these little references and these little like, oh yeah, I know that those the La Rue des Macaroons in Marie Antoinette, you know, you kind of feel like you're part of something, you're part of a little gang. It's the same with, I think, people like Fincher, people like Paul Thomas Anderson, people like Tarantino, especially, like all the kind of like Easter eggs in their films that you feel like you're kind of mates with the director because you understand the reference.
Yeah, red apple cigarettes and let's have some more foot shots.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the things. It's one of those things as well, isn't it? In a male director, it'd be considered sort of style. And it would be a signature, and you wouldn't really, you know, I mean, people do criticize Wes Anderson, I suppose, for being so Wes Anderson-y, but at the same time, what do you want? You know, do you want him to be Michael Haneke? Because we've already got one of those. And the same thing with Sofia Coppola. I mean, I think that the time when you sort of criticize her maybe the most severely, or at least you hold her to account a little bit more, is in terms of her treatment of race in Lost in Translation and The Beguiled. And I'm with you there. I think it's just a like. I think you mentioned how she sort of says, "I'm not racist. I love, you know, Japanese people or whatever." And of course, you're not racist like consciously, but that doesn't mean you've not imbibed and are reproducing certain racist tropes or racial stereotypes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it did feel important to me as well to bring in other voices and to look at critics who were calling her out at the time, because they did exist. You know, a lot of Japanese critics particularly wrote like this is quite offensive and here's why. And with The Beguiled, there was a lot of amazing writing by Black writers about The Beguiled and about how problematic Sofia's treatment of the South was, and particularly her removing a mixed race character from the script, which I think Sofia herself probably admits now was not the right call to make. It's almost this thing, I think, with The Beguiled, in that she was so afraid to do it wrong that she decided she wasn't going to do it at all, which is just no excuse, really. It's so, if anyone can kind of afford to go out on a limb, it's Sofia Coppola, and she just kind of avoided that. Whereas, yeah, Lost in Translation is such a product of its time, and people say that sometimes as a get out of jail free, but I didn't want it to feel like I was giving her a pass, because I think if you love someone, you are able to kind of process their flaws and process where their work might be problematic or might have issues. And that was something that I really I felt, obviously I benefit a lot from white privilege the same as she does, and I felt like it would be remiss of me to kind of not address that within her work. And I think she's kind of made some concessions over the years about where she may have got things wrong, but she wears kind of that privilege on her sleeve a lot of the time. I think, you know, this is also a reason she kind of gets criticized, because she makes films about how hard it is being rich and famous, and for some people that, you know, that kind of doesn't work at all, and for others it really does. Because I mean, I've said this a lot over the years, but I think when you're so used to not seeing your own experience on the screen, you make, I think, more allowances. So, you know, I was watching these films growing up and I was thinking to myself, like, well, obviously, you know, I'm not rich and I don't live in this beautiful house in Michigan, but I know what it's like to be an incredibly depressed teenager, or, you know, I kind of know what it's like to have a difficult relationship with my parents. So, you know, just because these films are very specific doesn't mean that they don't have things that I think are incredibly universal and incredibly meaningful to a vast range of people, not just teenagers. I think that there's many people who relate to things that come across in her films, and you know, that was why I felt it was really important I kind of try to do justice to the many like layers, and I didn't want it to seem like it was just this hagiography going, oh, she's so wonderful, she's so great, because I think every filmmaker makes mistakes. Every filmmaker is worthy of kind of addressing, you know, you need to address those things and talk about them and kind of find a path through them, and hopefully that's what I managed to do. But yeah, I was really conscious. I didn't want it to be just relentless praise of her.
No, absolutely. I think you did totally. And I mean, if we're going to accept people's you know, social realities, then some of those social realities are going to be outside of our experience. They're going to be limiting. They're not necessarily all going to be, you know, exactly what we agree with. I mean, I was thinking of her in terms of, you know, there's a filmmaker I don't get on particularly well with, but I do admire his work, is Eric Rohmer. And Eric Rohmer's just utterly uninterested in anybody who's not sort of wealthy, bourgeois, you know, white. You know, he's come out with some quite racist statements in the past as well. But, you know, that's his thing. That's where he's from. That's what he's doing. And, you know, you don't have to ignore it. You can comment on it, but it's not necessarily a disqualifier. I think that's the point. I think that's going back to what you were saying earlier about Twitter and social media and whatever. It's this idea that we can slam doors on people and disqualify them because of certain perceived shortcomings, which I think is problematic.
Yeah, I agree. And we mentioned Wes Anderson earlier, who's obviously like, he's again like a contemporary of Sofia's. They basically started making films at the same time, and they're good friends, and he makes films, I think, about a very specific type of person most of the time, or a very specific worldview. And I don't think we need him to be kind of going out of his way to tell other stories. I think that it would be preferable for the filmmakers who are better placed to tell these stories, whether it's about other races or other parts of the world, or, you know, sexualities, whatever. I think it would be better for the filmmakers who do want to tell those stories and do feel placed to tell those stories get the opportunities, rather than just like expecting that every filmmaker has to tell every story. And I you know, obviously I think it's nice when filmmakers challenge themselves to talk about new things in their work, but I don't think it always works. And I also think there is this idea of like, who gets to tell these stories? You know, just because someone has a position of influence in the filmmaking world, I don't think it's necessarily right that they get asked to do certain things and to make certain films. So I think that there is kind of something to be said for like staying in your lane a little bit as a filmmaker and just doing the thing that you are good at and doing it very well. And I think there's room enough to have filmmakers like Sofia Coppola and like Wes Anderson and like whoever else who are just doing their kind of thing, and they have their style and their set of interests that they want to talk about. And then there's room for kind of everything, you know, all these other perspectives. Hopefully, I hope that's the way it is. I mean, very idealistic of me, but one of the things I do think, and I think Sofia does it to an extent, I think she could probably do it more, is when these filmmakers help lift up these new voices and like show a kind of interest in nurturing that talent. And Sofia does a lot of like producing, a lot of executive producing, so I think like she kind of does that to an extent. And someone who's amazing at doing it is Barry Jenkins. Like, he's constantly uplifting the next generation of filmmakers and new talent, and I think that is the best way to be as a filmmaker, if you can bring other people up with you and try and like open the doors and, you know, not kind of keep it to this rarefied group of people who can, you know, only they can possibly deign to sit behind the camera and direct actors. So I think that's one area that I think like there's so much room for improvement. And obviously as critics, you know, we spend a lot of our time championing these new filmmakers, but that doesn't mean I want to abandon all my old faves as well. I kind of want to have it both ways. I want to respect the old guard and kind of make sure we're giving like credit to all these people coming through constantly, because there are like people like Charlotte Wells, for example, like, you know, she has such an incredible perspective, but then you look at the films that influenced her, like Somewhere, like Sofia Coppola's work, like Jane Campion's work, and it's like we kind of needed these filmmakers in order to inspire the next lot of filmmakers. So yeah, certainly like I don't think there's any need to throw the baby out with the bathwater, as my mum would say. I think it's just a case of like trying to be mindful of these limitations and just be open, you know, be open to the experiences that they're trying to depict. I mean, I can't wait to see her take on Priscilla Presley. I'm so excited to see kind of how she's envisioned that, especially after Elvis, because I imagine this is just going to be the complete opposite, because she's the opposite of Baz Luhrmann. She's not bombastic at all. So.
that should be on the next poster. The opposite of Baz Luhrmann.
I love Baz Luhrmann. I really enjoyed Elvis.
Oh, I loved Elvis. Elvis was in my top 10. It was one of my favorite films of last year. It was the only film I saw at Cannes that I paid to watch again.
Oh, really?
Which, I just had such a ball.
It yet. I'm going to rewatch it, maybe in time for the Oscars, because it's you know, it's done quite well with the nominations, so I might rewatch it. But yeah, I just had such a fun time with it, and I was really glad I didn't have to review it, actually, because I was like, you know, sometimes it's nice to just enjoy a film and not have to think about it. So.
yeah, enjoying films and not having to think about them. That's Baz Luhrmann in a nutshell.
It's so rare we get to do that, isn't it? As like film writers, it's so rare. I have to not have an opinion, not have like a public opinions. It's the greatest joy in the world to just watch something and think, this is just for me. This is just purely for my enjoyment. It's
quite liberating. You're absolutely right. And there are certain films I never want to talk about. You know, there's it's something I mentioned. Yeah, in true postmodern fashion, I tweeted about not wanting to talk about certain films, and someone said, "Okay, what films? Give us an example." And my reply was, "Blue is the warmest color." I don't want to talk about that film.
Why don't you want to talk about it? It's like, for God's sake,
that's exactly But I love that film, and I don't feel any need to go into it further than that. You know?
Yeah. No, this is exactly it. I think that sometimes it's nice to just have things that you love and you don't feel kind of the need to share, your reasoning, and that is fine in my opinion. It was why I was kind of nervous about doing this book, because I think for a long time I had written I'd written two pieces about Sofia Coppola at the time, both about the Virgin Suicides, and I was very nervous to write this book, which was going to be kind of putting it all out there and opening myself up to criticism, which is a weird place to be in as a film critic, to be suddenly the subject of criticism, though people have been very nice about the book. Not saying I'm getting like hate mail or anything, but yeah, it was a weird experience to kind of suddenly have to not necessarily defend my opinions, but just have to like think very critically about things that I'd previously not, like something like The Bling Ring, something like Marie Antoinette. I'd never really had to think about them in a kind of critical context, because I wasn't old enough to be a film critic when they came out, when I watched them for the first time. So it was a kind of weird thing to be like second guessing myself and thinking like, does this work in the context of a book rather than like a film review? Is this going to kind of stand the test of time? Because, you know, you put out a magazine, it's on the shelves for 3 months. You put out a book, it's there for years, hopefully. So I felt a kind of like additional sense of pressure to like do justice and to be honest and open about my perspective on the films, but also kind of conscious that it was forming this wider like history of her as an artist. It's a very specific and strange thing to put together a whole book about one filmmaker, and you'll know this yourself, like you spend so much time with them that you feel kind of like, do I need to step away from this, like get some kind of perspective? Like it is a really like daunting and fascinating experience, but at the end of it you do feel like you know them, and it's like I don't know you, like I don't know Sofia Coppola. But I was
going to ask you about that. I wanted to ask you about that because yeah, I mean, what was your thinking about not, I mean, did you approach her? Was it something like that, or did you think I prefer to just write this from my own standpoint? And
yeah, so with the other two books, other three books by this point. So Abrams had the very first one they did was the Coen Brothers book, and the Coen Brothers are obviously notoriously kind of difficult to get hold of, and they don't do a lot of interviews. And I think at the time they were making Buster Scruggs as well, so it was kind of like they just weren't around. So it was out of necessity that Adam Naiman didn't get to speak to them. And that was fine. The book came out great, and they were able to do so many amazing interviews around it. It didn't really feel like you were missing that. And then similar with Paul Thomas Anderson, I think he was busy shooting the Phantom Thread, and Fincher, I think, was doing Mank at the time. So there was always just a project in the way with the other books. But the filmmakers always knew they were happening. We got in touch with their agents, and the agents were always like super supportive and helped set up a lot of interviews, and all the filmmakers gave the books their blessing. So the Coens and PTA and Fincher all like said, we are happy with this. It's not like an official product, but like they were all happy with it being made, which is good. And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that like they knew Little White Lies and were happy about Little White Lies being involved. So we started off like from a good place, and it happens that Sofia Coppola's agent is also Paul Thomas Anderson's agent. So she is amazing. She's really like veteran PR, and she was delighted that we were going to do it because she loved the Paul Thomas Anderson book, and Paul Thomas Anderson loved the Paul Thomas Anderson book. So so she was really, really amazing in setting everything up for us, and Sofia was delighted like straight away. She was all this I was getting secondhand from the agent, but she said like, oh, we're really happy it's a female writer, because a lot of people have suggested this in the past, doing a book on her, but it's always been male writers. There's never been anyone who's approached with this kind of proposition before. So they were really happy, and we were always going to do it regardless of whether or not we got sign off. The book was always going to happen, but we knew, because the other three didn't have interviews with the filmmaker, this one wasn't going to have one either. So, and the Bong Joon-ho book that came after as well was a similar thing. Like he was aware of the book and knew it was going to happen, but he is not involved in the book, because we just found that it would feel a bit too much like an endorsement to kind of have a big career interview. And I also find with Sofia, like, she has always struck me as quite a shy person, and her interviews, I don't think that they necessarily are as interesting as the films. Like I love hearing her speak, but I think sometimes she maybe puts it all out on the screen, so we don't really necessarily need, she's not someone like Paul Thomas Anderson or Dave Fincher who can talk till the cows come home about their process and you know, why every shot looks the way it does. I think that she's much more kind of cerebral and, you know, kind of like it's all internal with her. So we knew that she approved the book, but she wasn't going to be in the book in any capacity, which meant it was mostly about finding the right kind of people, the voices around her to bring in, so people that had worked with her. And she, again, like Sofia and her agent was so good at like setting that stuff up. Like we got Kirsten Dunst for half an hour, which is, she was in the middle of the press campaign for Power of the Dog. It had literally just been at Venice, so right. she was amazing to be available and make herself available and give me time and be so generous. And it was the same with all Sofia's collaborators, like Philip Lassorde, her cinematographer, and Brian Whitesell. They were so accommodating and so happy to be involved. And they, you know, it would be, oh, I've got half an hour, and they'd give me a ring, and it'd be like an hour later, they'd be like, okay, I should probably get going now. So they were so kind of like just delightful and happy that there was going to be something big on Sofia, and they were so generous. Like Philip was sending me photos from the productions, and Brian as well, and Sofia's on-set photographer, Andrew Durham, who's absolutely, he's just made a film of his own actually, but he sent me a ton of press, like the photos from on set, and he said to me, yeah, just use what you want, just credit me. Wow. And I was like, do you not want paying? And he's like, no, it's fine, just use the credit. And I was like, what? You know, kind of wow. I was very fortunate that she works with this just amazing, like incredibly generous group of people who are just such big fans of her that they want to kind of talk about their work together, and they want to be involved in a big career project. There's no hint of any sort of like talking head style fallout, you know. It's right, all kind of like everyone just can't wait to chat about how much of a good time they had working with her.
Oh, that's brilliant. And I think it is important to recognize that, you know, this is a big, Abrams do these beautiful big books. It's not easy getting a book written about a director. There aren't that many directors out there who publishers will take a chance on. And to be the writer of the Sofia Coppola Abrams book is an amazing achievement. I think you've done a wonderful job. And it is the one time, as you were saying about print journalism, that lasts for a few weeks, few months maybe. But a book like this is where Coppola studies will begin. For many years. It will be the where you'll have to have read this in order to start thinking and considering it. So I think it's a marvelous thing in that sense.
That's not scary at all. The idea of people having to like study and disprove me and stuff, that's not terrifying. But I mean, it is, I also, something that I wanted, one of my first conversations about this book, and it sounds very earnest, but I am quite an earnest person, so it fits. But I wanted the book that I never had when I was 16. I wanted this to be the book you buy because you've seen The Virgin Suicides and you loved it and you want to know who Sofia Coppola is. So in some ways, it's kind of like an overview more, and for the kind of hardcore cinephiles, it's probably not going to be like, you know, there's a lot of stuff that I'll probably already be aware of, but I have had so many teenagers, and especially at the screenings I was doing, it was the loveliest thing in the world to see so many teenage girls and teenage boys as well, like come up to me with their parents, and they were very like shy and were like, oh, I just, you know, I really love Sofia Coppola. And there was one girl who came with her grandparents in LA, and she was kind of like hid behind them, like didn't want to really talk to me, and I was like signing her book, and it's really lovely to think that this could be someone's like gateway into the world that I loved so much and still love as well. Like I like the idea of having these formative kind of texts that make you want to be a writer or make you want to study film or make films. And that sounds very lofty, but if I could do that for, you know, kind of one of the teenager, give them this feeling that like, yes, someone else gets it, then like that was always my end goal. And I'm lucky that I was just asked to do it in such a kind of lavish fashion with such, beautiful design work. Like Tertia Nash, who designed it, is just absolutely like blew me away with kind of every detail. She wasn't even a Sofia fan when we started working on the book. She'd seen, I think, one of her films. So to be able to kind of translate my words and my vision, despite not really knowing what I was talking about a lot of the time, I think it's just kind of incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I didn't mean it in any way for it to sound like you're in the academic. Now you're in the academic stratosphere. No, I that comes as well, obviously. But yeah, no, I just mean like that. The books on the shelves of the sort of film section of Waterstones, there aren't, it's a pretty, I mean, I know from doing this podcast, this is a niche of a niche of a niche, if you like. So to the advantage of that is that, if you get to write one of these books, then you're having that word. You're contributing to the legacy. It doesn't surprise me at all that the agents are pleased and well, I've just noticed in the background you've got an Annette poster on your wall as well.
Yeah.
Okay. We're on the same page with everything.
Well, there's a house that Jack built one next to it, so I don't know.
Oh no! Uh-oh. Shots fired.
Yeah, I do find it very funny that like in my flat it's like Annette, house that Jack built. There is now a Nan Goldin poster up, so there is a woman on the wall. But I was like, man, yeah, it's like walking into like a film bros flat at the moment. Like, I have to like get some women up on the wall. Though I do have, I'm just looking again. There's a Magnolia poster and an Uncut Gems one as well. So it is bad, but there's also a Lynn Ramsey poster and the letter that Sophia sent me when she got her copy of the book. So there is like some female representation up there.
Brilliant. Talking about gateway, wait a second, I was going to say gateway drugs. Great gateway books, which let's face it, the analogy doesn't have to be laboured too much to work. What would be a recommended film book that you'd be able to give our listeners?
Oh God, I actually, having recently got my copy, a friend of mine, I sound awful like recommending my friends' books, but I do think it's a really good book and it's also relevant to Sofia Coppola. My friend Charles Romesco has just published his second book, which is called The Colour of Film, and it's out beginning of February in the US, and I think beginning of February UK, beginning of March US, and it's the story of film through 50 colour palettes from films. So it's a really like, I think, engaging way of looking at film that I think we talk about a lot and we see visually, but there's maybe not a ton to buy in kind of a bookstore. So it looks really nice on your coffee table, but it's also just like a really fun and expansive look at the use of film, use of color in film, and how that's changed over time, how it hasn't changed, and kind of why filmmakers use the colors they do and things that reoccur. So that would be my recommendation. Not a formative experience, but hopefully it will be for other readers. And it's always nice as well to support kind of indie publishing, I think, with these books as well.
And that will be available on Amazon.com. No,
Bookshop.org.
Yes, I know. I've got my own. I've got a Writers on Film Bookshop.org shop front that I set up right at the beginning. And do you know how many copies of people have bought? 0. Absolutely none.
Yeah, I was telling everyone when my book came out, I was like, I know it's cheaper on Amazon, but can you just buy it anywhere else? Like,
yeah.
I don't get royalties either, so I'm just kind of like, well, at the end of the day, it goes into someone's pocket, but not mine. So
yeah. Poor Bezos, poor Jeffrey.
He's fine.
He's down to his last 100 billion, I think. Poor Elon. Elon's the one I'm worried about. I stay up nights worried about Elon. Oh, there's a guy who needs a Sofia Coppola film. Cheer him up. Listen, Hannah, thank you so much for talking to me. It's been an absolute blast. I loved reading your book and likewise having this conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, that was my conversation with Hannah Strong about her book on Sofia Coppola. Her recommended book was Charles Bramesco's book on the colour of film. I'm going to see if I can reach out to Charles and get him to come on the podcast as well as a guest. That gives me an opportunity to read the book as well. It sounds fascinating, so that recommendation went down well. Remember, you can follow me on Twitter at Dr. Jonty, DRJONTY. Thanks very much to Elliot Atkins for the music. Thanks to Ali Harwood for the design and the look of the site. And thanks to you, dear listener, for spending your time with us today.
As the days get shorter and the nights chillier, it's tough to keep up your fall workout routine. Thankfully, there's Alo Moves, the app that brings workouts and wellness to the comfort of your home. Join alomoves.com with code ACAST for a 30-day free trial and 20% off an annual membership. From yoga and Pilates to sound baths and meditations, Alo Moves has it all, with classes made to fit every schedule. Find your perfect wellness routine anytime and anywhere with code ACAST at alomoves.com.
1-800-Flowers.com knows that a gift is never just a gift. A gift is an expression of everything you feel and helps build more meaningful relationships. 1-800-Flowers takes the pressure off by helping you navigate life's important moments by making it simple to find the perfect gift. From flowers and cookies to cake and chocolate, 1-800-Flowers helps guide you in finding the right gift to say how you feel. To learn more, visit 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST. That's 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST.
Cue the fireplace and your favorite fall movie. There's nothing better than a cozy evening at home with a glass of First Leaf wine. First Leaf is a personalized wine club that delivers right to your door. Sounds magical, right? They get to know your favorite tasting notes, which varietals you enjoy, and whether you prefer sweet or dry wines. So in every shipment, you get bottles tailored to your unique palate. Go to tryfirstleaf.com/fall to get your first 6 wines for just $44.95 with free shipping.